Good afternoon. My name is With Morris. I'm a retired extension agent from Virginia Cooperative Extension, and today we would like to share with you some information related to food safety regulations and how to understand the requirements, inspections, and audits. There's a lot of misconception about some of this and how it all comes together, and so hopefully today we can share some of this and help you to understand what all of this is about and how it fits together. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start into this presentation, and as we go along, if you have any questions, if you'll save them, we'll try to answer them toward the end, or you can submit them in the video and I will try to get back to you and answer them. With that being said, let's just look at the big picture of this thing. And there are lots of different areas of food safety. And you've heard the term GAP, Good Agricultural Practices. And this is a tag that has been added to or picked up as far as food safety is concerned. And there are a lot of different steps to that. Just to kind of explain to you a little bit from this chart that you see here, with food safety, you have a basic GAP or GHP, Good Handling Practice Training, and this goes along with a lot of your direct marketers, folks who are doing farmers markets or CSAs or direct to consumer type activities. So there are some basic practices that these folks need to be aware of. They're not a part of any type of a certification program. So with that being said, it's something that you can pick up most any extension office or whatever as far as some guidance is concerned. Now, with that being said, a few years ago in 2011, we did come with an idea called food safety training, or FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, which was a federal act signed by Congress and enacted. And in FSMA training, basically, if you think of FSMA training and FSMA itself as a basic requirement type thing for food safety. We're going to talk about it a little bit more, but with FSMA, like I said, it's a basic requirement. There are no certification programs in it. Basically, it requires that at least one person from each farm operation attend a training and have received training in FSMA or food safety. So with that being said, it's a very basic type of instruction and training program. There are things that go along with this now that include inspections and certain minimum requirements that growers are required to do. Moving on to the next step, and we look at USDA GAP, GHP audit and certification. And this basically is a auditing process where a farm prepares a written food safety manual and incorporates specific practices based on audit questions. And when they do that, once they have this prepared and ready, then they're able to request a Gap audit from a person who is designated through USDA, and usually it works with our state departments of agriculture also, but it allows you to get an audit that you're food safety compliant, that you have completed certain things on your farm, and that you are practicing on a regular basis certain items. So this is something that a lot of our produce growers, when they first start out with GAP and food safety, we start at this level so that they can get an understanding of the manual, the questions, the audit questions, and the compliance and so forth. Now, with that being said, a lot of buyers are asking for this next step here, which is the Produce Gap's Harmonized Audit and Certification, and you hear it designated as HGAP or HGAP Plus. And with that being said, HGAP is a standard, and HGAP Plus is that same standard that helps to meet foreign buyers, and if you're exporting and selling exclusively to big box retailers and so forth, they look at the HGAP Plus. But we're going to talk about it in this presentation, and you're going to see that basically food safety is the same in both instances. The only thing, HGAP Plus has additional written requirements and additional investments that you have to do in order to satisfy that particular audit. It does not change the quality of the food safety program whatsoever. So we'll talk about that just a little bit. And then also I'll mention here the last one on the right, crop-specific food safety protocols. And there are some of these. Different states have different things. Here in Virginia, we offer a tomato protocol. We offer an additional one in leafy greens, mushrooms, and also in seed potatoes. If you're certifying seed potatoes for sale, there's also a specific food safety protocol as far as producing those. So with that being said, that's pretty much the different steps to food safety and GAP compliance, and each one of them gets a little bit more involved as we go. Our next slide here, we look at these and we kind of compare them a little bit, and if you'll see on this chart here, the bottom row allows you to look at this, and these all three, whether it's the basic USDA GAP GHP certification, the Harmonized GAP, or the Harmonized GAP Plus, all three adhere to the basic industry and FDA best practices. There is no difference. All of them do that. Now, with that being said, when we look at some other levels, when we look at the Harmonized GAP, which we call a Harmonized GAP Standard, it meets the best practices. The harmonized practices that are included, which are an additional practices that go along with your food safety plan, and then it also includes under that HGAP standard. It also includes your basic minimal FSMA requirements that are there for basic requirements. It does not, in the case of the Harmonized GAP standard, it does not meet the global food safety, which is basically the European and the requirements for exporters and those that are selling in large quantities to some of your big box groups and so forth. So you can kind of see how this works, but FSMA has been included in the HGAP standards, both of them. They are not included in the basic GAP. We have been working with that, and we do have a supplemental section that can go in a manual that helps you to satisfy those. So with that being said, that's kind of like the different service steps or tiers to GAP as far as food safety is concerned. Looking at the next slide, let's look a little bit at FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act. It was a federal law, and it requires all segments of the industry to grow, harvest, pack, and hold produce in such a way that minimizes the risk of causing foodborne illness. And with that being said, it's a regulatory program, and it's based on inspections, not audits. Now, what does that mean? That means that you do have certain individuals designated as food safety inspectors that come out, and they can do an audit at your farm and visit your farm and look to see if you're practicing those minimum requirements that have been set forth under FSMA. that being said, they do not do a complete audit. This is not a audit program. Again, remember, it's regulatory. So they can come and inspect at any time they want to. They do not have to be invited. They can come at any time. Now, the produce safety rule, which basically requires a GAP, the produce safety rule basically, or FSMA, is based on the GAP audit, but at the same time, the practices are not taken to the point that you are awarded points or scored or pass or do not pass an audit. It's basically an inspection type activity. And one last point here that I like to mention, and this gets confused by so many buyers above you who are buying your product. FSMA is not a certification program. In other words, you do not have any type of documentation that verifies that you have been certified once a inspection has been made. You are doing that under GAP. It is totally different than FSMA. So just remember that this is not a certification program. You'll have a lot of buyers that'll ask you, well, can I see your farm's GAP certificate? And remember, the farm FSMA certificate, there is no such thing as a FSMA certificate here. So with that being said, there is not a audit that has been done for FSMA. Now, taking a look at these, let's look at the basic GAP audit. And remember, this is the first step, or one that we suggest that growers start out with when they are doing audits. If you've been with this workshop this morning, you have seen some of the materials and outlines for a basic food safety audit. And again, we work with first-time growers and smaller growers, and this is a great place to start out to learn how to do your farm food safety manual. And so this has been the same since September 2014. We do foresee some changes possibly coming where this also will have FSMA incorporated into the audit questions. It has not been done yet, and so that's something that's kind of on the horizon that you might see in the future. Now, although growers can be GAP certified with required sections on this one, there are several different sections of this audit, but basically the way it works is that there are 2 audits that are required by all farms, and that is demographics and general questions, which are basically the hygiene and health type questions, plus one other section. And in this case, a lot of our growers start out with a farm review, and farm review plus the demographics and general questions will get you a GAP audit. It will complete it. At the same time, we encourage growers to do a complete audit that covers all of their farming operation. So that might mean that they may have to add an extra section, such as field harvest and field packing activities. Or in the case of some of the larger growers who have some house packing facilities, they may want to add that one also. Remember that under the basic GAP audit that we're talking about here, you still need to satisfy FSMA requirements, including some of the record keeping that's required there. So with that being said, this kind of explains it. One last point here, these audits are buyer driven. Must still, if you're doing audits or some type of an audit, whether it's HGAP or a basic audit or whatever, check with your buyer to see what they will require as far as a food safety audit's concerned. What satisfies their requirements is what goes. So with that being said, always stay in contact with your buyers and know what they need in the way of food safety audits, because this thing passes right up the line. Next point here, let's look at Harmonized GAP or HGAP Standard. In 2009, there was an initiative by United Fresh to bring together all kinds of produce industry personnel, and the goal for all of them was to help growers avoid what they were calling an audit fatigue. And with that being said, there were a lot of growers that were doing multiple food safety audits depending on what buyer they were dealing with. And the questions were the same, the outcomes were the same, but they were doing 2 or 3 different audits and taking all of this time and effort to satisfy all of these different audits. The common goal of a HGAP audit was one audit by any credible third party, that's the inspectors, acceptable by all buyers. And this worked pretty good, except for a couple of buyers who wanted additional questions added and so forth. And with that being said, it was edited quite often. It was tweaked quite a bit. And then in May of 2018, it was issued the new harmonized, what they then called the Harmonized Standard and the HGAP Plus was issued, and FSMA was incorporated into this one document. So everything started to come together in 2018, and that now is what we work on when we do one of these HGAP audits. And with that, it was incorporated, like we just said. If you're doing HGAP Plus, which this slide talks about HGAP Plus, you also included GFSI, Global Food Safety Initiative standards into that, or they called them benchmarks. GFSI was ones that would satisfy some of the European and the foreign buyers who were buying product in this country. And with that being said, this additional GFSI documentation that's included in HGAP Plus is owned by what's now the European Consumer Goods Forum, which is a group out of Belgium. And this group actually owns it. And in order to use their questions or their standards in an audit, they charge an additional $250 annually in order for you to get this particular audit. Not sure quite where this goes, other than it goes over to Europe, and these folks collect this money. And it's an annual certification fee that goes in. And this is over and above your cost for doing a normal GAP audit. So just to mention that HGAP Plus is somewhat different. We're going to look at the additional items that are required here shortly. Who needs an HGAP Plus? Well, if you export, I've said this a couple of times, if you export product to other countries, you're going to need an HGAP Plus. If you sell almost exclusively to big box retailers who, in a lot of cases, do have businesses in other countries, then you might require this audit also, and they will tell you if they require this. And that's part of the thing of doing business with the big guys. You're going to pay their fees. You're going to pay that on a regular basis, and this is one of the things that you might as well get used to if you enjoy selling to the big people. Now, with that being said, HGAP Plus is a large amount of additional paperwork that I've told you about. And with that being said, be prepared to do a couple of things. And first of all, you might as well start looking at the idea of employing a full-time staff person just to handle food safety on your farm or business operation. There's a lot of additional writing, monitoring, record keeping, and so forth in order to meet this HGAP Plus standard. Also, be prepared to invest some additional funds to meet the requirements. The one that jumps out immediately is that when you start to do packaging, generic packaging is no longer acceptable. If you're doing cabbage, you have to do it in a box that says cabbage on it. If you do squash, it has to have it marked on the box what you're using. So a generic 4/5 bushel box does not work for several different types of produce. And with that being said, I can just tell you this, not only do those requirements fall there and cost you some extra money, but they have to be specialty printed too. So you pay a setup, and you also have to buy a minimum amount of inventory usually in order to have specially printed boxes and packaging. That being said, be prepared for storage, be prepared for packaging for each individual crop that you're doing. A lot of different things go into HGAP Plus, and so just be prepared ahead of time to invest extra money. Don't look for any help that much from your buyers, because they just pass it down to the grower. So let's look at USDA audit fees, and there are other third-party auditors. The reason that we go with this one quite often is that actually this is one of the most reasonable. A lot of your auditors, your third-party auditors, will charge you by the day, and it will go somewhere in the neighborhood, just to give you an example, and these figures are kind of dated, but to give you an example, some of them will charge you $1,200 to $1,500 a day. Even if they only spend a couple of hours, they're still going to charge you that. USDA audit services are a little bit more reasonable because they charge you by the hour. If they come to your farm to do an audit and they are on your farm, for example, 3 hours, they'll charge you for 3 hours plus their travel. So they're a little bit more available to work with, a little bit more reasonable for these audits and so forth. They can handle all of them, including the HGAP series of audits. And just remember, HGAP Plus, not only do you pay the per hour rate and the travel, but you also pay an additional $250 fee each year just going to Europe, whether you're exporting or not. If you get this one, you pay the fee. Now, food safety audit certifications are conducted annually along with unannounced visits, so be prepared. This is an annual affair to have an audit done, and then you can have unannounced visits along the way. So with those being said, and those are not free either if they come, so just be prepared for some of those. Now, one thing, and I put it down at the bottom here, some of our growers are now seeing an additional fee from USDA, approximately 7.7%, for what they call reviewing the audit report. In other words, your auditor writes out the report at your farm or shortly thereafter and sends it into USDA, and USDA is charging this to look at that same report again before they file it, and then also to add it to their database and so forth. So just be prepared for that. And again, don't shoot the messenger here. I'm just trying to share with you what's going on and let you see what's in store if you're doing audit services. Now, let's look at HGAP and HGAP Plus a little bit. Back in May 2018, these things changed, and now you have basically 4 sections of an HGAP or HGAP Plus audit. You have a section called General Questions required of all operations. You have a section F for Field Operations and Handling, and I like to designate this as everything that occurs on your farm site. Everything that happens there, including any types of coolers, any types of washing, processing, post-harvest operations, whatever. If it happens at your farm site, it'll be under Section F. Now, post-harvest operations are those operations where once that product leaves your farm, if it goes to a different location to have certain things done, such as grading, washing, packaging, and so forth, at a different site other than your farm, that's considered post-harvest. And those are a different type of audit altogether. So be aware of that. You can do some of your post-harvest activities under F if it all happens at your farm. But if it leaves your farm, it becomes post-harvest. And a lot of growers will have a post-harvest operation away from their general farm operation. And then last here, there's a section L, and that section is USDA logo use addendum, and it's intended for those when you're getting packaging printed. If you are required to have the USDA logo on it, you have to fill that section out also. Now, with that, when all of these came out in 2018, they completely renumbered the system. There were a few questions that occurred multiple times, so they eliminated those, but at the same time, the whole system got renumbered. You will see documentation and supporting documents there. You'll see written policies, procedures, and or some type of plan. You'll see records. They ask for records on certain things, and it'll tell you. And it'll also ask you to do some risk assessments. Risk assessments are those things that basically you do annually or semi-annually, and you look at yourself, you take a look at your farm and do those types of things. There were also some adjustments on scoring, and we'll talk about that just a little bit. And then again, going back, FSMA was incorporated into these audits, so you don't have to worry about a separate FSMA audit or inspection, because FSMA is already in here. The questions that the inspector would look for will be somewhere in your food safety manual that you've written. So FSMA's in there, and also if you're doing HGAP Plus, those GFSI questions and HACCP questions and a lot of those other writing exercises are also included in your manual. So that kind of gives you an idea of what happened back in 2018. So with that being said, let's look just a little bit. Our scoring for a harmonized audit is a little bit different. You have items marked that are compliant. When that auditor looks at them, they are compliant. They meet the requirements under the standard. You may have some where you need a corrective action, and don't get too panicky about corrective action at the beginning. It doesn't meet the requirement of the standard as it's written, maybe, but it's not a non-conformance. It's not considered to be a food safety risk. An example might be a missing piece of paperwork or a missing record or part of a standard operating procedure that did not get fully completed or something. And you can complete those and get them to your auditor, and everything will be fine. You won't have any problem with those at all. Now, also in harmonized scoring, immediate action required. If an auditor sees something that is an imminent food safety risk, they can give you an IAR. And these are the ones that you do not want to get. These are ones that basically you can see there. It could be conditions that promote or cause produce to become contaminated. If you see employee practices, personal or hygienic, that jeopardize, lack of hand washing or trash or rodents or something like that, insects or other pests, it could be considered an IAR. And if that's the case and you get an IAR, the audit, you cannot pass an audit with an IAR. It has to be addressed immediately, and usually the audit's going to stop, and you will pay for that visit, plus you'll pay for another one to come back to inspect to correct that. Also, there are items on this list of audit questions that may not apply to your farm whatsoever, and so those will be marked as NA, items that do not apply to your farm or your farming operation. Now, scoring. On the harmonized audit, it's a little bit different. If you look on the left, if you have done a basic Gap audit, you're familiar with this, that you receive points for each section or each audit question, and you have to get 80% of each section in order to pass. On the produce, on the harmonized side of it, we've gone over the non-compliance system, and they're pass-fail. There's no points assigned, but after all things are evaluated, each of the major sections, the general questions, the farm section, the post-harvest, anything that's not answered as an NA must be compliant. At least 80% of it must be compliant. So with that being said, it's an 80% of all your compliant all your questions that apply to your farm. Certified farms, once they're past their audit, they are posted on the USDA website, as are the basic Gap. And in this case, buyers can, if they want to, they can request and keep a copy of the audit. The official copies can be sent to them at the request of the grower, and the grower, of course, there's a fee involved when these go out. So basically, that's kind of what you're looking at again. But again, this is the way the thing scores. Now, any USDA audit that's done, there are certain minimum acceptance criteria, and you need to be aware of these. No questions are assessed. No questions assessed as an IAR, which we have discussed. None of these questions can be there, because if they are, then the audit cannot be passed. Any falsification of records is considered an IAR, and the audit ceases or stops. Any question marks with a dot, as you see there in the MAN, which MAN stands for mandatory. So if you see a dot beside those questions, that is a mandatory question, and it must be assessed as compliant, unless, of course, it does not apply to your farming operation. Most of these, you'll find out, are pretty much those types of questions that will apply to your operation. If you have, and it says operation must have performed all risk assessments designated with an A in the document column. So if you have a risk assessment in the standard, you must go through and do that assessment. You need to review it with your team when you're doing your food safety meetings, and if there are things there that you need to address, you need to take care of those items. It helps you to take a good close look at yourself and your farm to see what you really are doing and where there may be some shortcomings. If you have been audited in previous years, number 5, if you have been audited in previous years and you have gotten a IAR, or if you've gotten a CAN, a corrective action needed, or an IAR, you need to have taken care of those from previous years. All of them have to be addressed before you can pass this year's audit. And last one, it says that, and we've talked about this, in each major section of the audit, at least 80% of the questions not answered as NA must be answered as compliant. So that kind of sums up the section there. Now let's take a look just a little bit at some HGAP Plus audit notes, because I told you that as far as food safety is concerned, The standard and the plus are pretty much the same. But you can see here, these are things that are going to involve additional writing, a lot of time. You're going to see that it's quite involved, and it's not something that you can do overnight. You have to have been working on this for quite some time to meet these additional audit questions included in both the plus and GFSI have determined these. But you can look here, written and measurable objectives on everything that goes on your farm. Written job descriptions for every worker position or job on your farm. Food safety plan review includes all suppliers. And suppliers means here vendors. If you're buying vendors, if you're buying fertilizer, if you're buying packaging and so forth, you need to have all the information where you have contacted these people, and they have also furnished you with their food safety compliance records also. You need to have written procedures for evaluating and approving and monitoring suppliers. So if you add a new supplier, you need to go through a list process. If you drop one, if you add one, you've got to have a procedure for evaluating and bringing on new suppliers. In a lot of cases, in these, you actually have to make a visit, or you have to be in contact with them to the point that you know about their procedures for food safety. Down here also, written procedures for approving contractors. Do you have a procedure set up? Is it written down? Written procedures for outsourced products or processes, including monitoring. If you have a crop inspection, if you have a crop advisor, do you have procedures on how you work with that individual and what their job is and so forth? Going up to the second column, packaging must include product identification. We just talked about that earlier. Generic packages don't cut it anymore. If you're doing HGAP plus, you've got to have product identification. Packaging must meet labeling for export. You need to know what all is required on that, and it all has to meet the labeling there. It does not. You do not want to be shipping or whatever and have it quarantined at a port somewhere waiting for an additional inspection. So a lot of packaging details have to go into this, and where we used to use labeling on the exterior, now it has to be printed in. So you can imagine if your box printer says, well, in order to get this specific label printed, you're going to have to buy 1,000 or 2,000 extra boxes and keep in your inventory so we can set it up. This all goes into account here if you're doing HGAP plus. Food safety incidents, G8. Food safety incidents are recorded and assessed to determine severity and risk. A lot of times we may have an incident, and in these cases now you've got to follow up on every one of them and document what happened and how you disposed the product, and a lot of other details there as far as those instances are concerned. You have to set up an incident management plan. How do you do in case something happens? Has it been reviewed? Have you tested it? Do you go through a dry run annually? Do you verify it? The last one down there is a written product release program. Example here, you've got to develop a program set up, procedure set up. If you have a product that, say, a label falls off, or the glue is not correct, or whatever, or something happens as far as that product's concerned, you pull it out of production until it gets corrected, and then how do you put it back in? Can you release it back? If you have boxes that basically do not hold up and you have to rebox a product, What do? How do you release it back into production where it can be shipped? But all of these things have to be accounted for, and you have to do records and a lot of write-up on these things. Going on another page here, annual written documented any risk arising from food defense assessment. In other words, you're going to do a food defense assessment at the beginning or possibly multiple times during the year. Any risks that have come up from that you need to address. And you've got to address those, and it has to be followed up and written down. Food defense plan is part of food defense. Have to have a written plan. This has to do with security and so forth. Food fraud assessment. And I can tell you this, that particular part of the new write-up materials, you're going to find it takes some time, and it also is going to be a little bit more difficult on certain types of producers, especially your organic growers and so forth. But food fraud assessment is another issue that has to be addressed with an HGAP Plus audit. A lot of extra paperwork there. Written food fraud plan to mitigate risk. How are you going to do this? What are some of the safety precautions you're going to do to make sure that there are no risk involved with any of your products that go out? These, again, if you're looking at these up the right-hand column here, a couple of them address HACCP. And if you're not familiar with HACCP, that's hazard analysis and critical control points. And in these particular things, we have in the past, we have used our Farm Food Safety Plan, our written manual, as our HACCP plan. If you're doing HGAP Plus, you're going to be taking it a step farther. And so everything that passes through your operation has to have its own section under HACCP. So every product that you box or ship or grow has to have a HACCP as part of that. List of farm chemicals with correct labels. You're going to have to maintain your chemicals with correct labels. And those records that you do as far as crop protection includes the target organism, and you also have to write down the justification for applying. In other words, you've got to say that you observed physical damage, or it is the time of the season that you have egg hatch or whatever, but you've got to write this down in your record keeping in addition to the standard records that are required for all crop protection applications. Your ag chemicals have to be approved for the crops stored, and they have to be stored separate from ag chemicals used for other purposes. So your crop protection chemicals are stored separately from your fertilizers and other materials that you use. Lastly on that one, and this kind of gets specific, but cloths, towels, and other cleaning materials that pose risk, contamination, not to be used. In other words, we used to wipe and dry tomatoes and other produce as it came off of a wash line. That's not allowed if you use towels or so forth. So you have to devise other devices to do your drying other than a physical wipe or clean. Just a few of the HGAP Plus that you need to know. So what's covered in this food safety plan? And if you've written one, you know, and this is a general list of a lot of different items that are in your food safety plan. There's no use going through each and every one of these, but at some point in your written food safety plan, whether you're doing a basic GAP or you're doing one of the two HGAPs, you're going to address these. And these are those minimum requirements by FDA that we talk about. And the audit questions address these different things that will be in your plan. Now, there are some materials available for HGAP audits, and I note these are HGAP Standard. We have helped a lot of growers go through the HGAP Standard because of not being a large area for export, and mostly our growers are rural and within states or within boundaries not large enough. We're not considered as exporters. So most all of our work that we have done has been with the HGAP Standard. And we do have a lot of these pieces of material already available for the HGAP Standard. The additional HGAP Plus materials and templates are not available from us. These must be generated by your farm's food safety coordinator, who again, if you're the grower and you're also the food safety coordinator, you're going to have a few nights that you're going to be up writing some materials to go along with this. Just to kind of give you some examples, here's some of the templates that we use. We do the HGAP Standard template on a spreadsheet, and we have those available. And it basically leads you through. These are the questions on the left, the numbers and the questions based on the standards. In the middle, this is what we do on our farm. This is where we answer. This is what we do. And then if it takes a written policy or a record or whatever, it shows you there what's needed. You see the dots that I referred to as mandatory items. And then on your corrective actions, you can do these as with your auditor as you go, so that you can know. But most of the time we do. The only one that we address here is the NAs if they do not apply to our farm. And then the right-hand column allows that auditor to find the specific standard operating procedure or supporting document that helps to support that audit question and what you have done to satisfy that question. So we do have templates set up for these, and we have those available. We also put together a master document list, and we have these available, not only some available in some of the manuals that we work with on the basic manual, but we have them so that you can download them if you need them. And we also have we can help you download this information from our website to help you with these. So we do have this material available. It includes things such as standard operating procedures, record sheets, and so forth. And one of the things that's very important to remember, every farm business operation is different, and you must organize these to fit your farm situation. So there are a lot of these. You're going to have to read every one of them. You're going to have to verify that this is how we do it on our farm. These are merely suggestions, but it helps to you to get through some of these things and to verify how we're doing it on our particular farm. But again, we do have a lot of the forms and so forth to do that. So how do I get through some of these advanced, these upper level things as far as HACCP is concerned, as far as HGAP Plus and so forth? Keep your eye open for workshops. They are offered from time to time, and your extension folks will have access to what was available. You have some extension and university specialists that can also help you with these things. Although I think in a lot of cases their concentration has been a little bit more toward direct marketers than they have commercial growers. So, but they are available and they can help you with some of this information. Also, a good place to find a lot of this, some of the trade shows, especially some of the regional ones and conferences, will have specific training sessions that will help you with these things. So there is information out there for those types of things, and so I urge you to take advantage of what comes your way, and don't think, I just tell you from my experience, a lot of times these workshops will happen and then they won't come around again for a couple of years. So keep an eye open. If you see one, it might be to your advantage to jump in and take that workshop or sit in on it when it comes your way. With that being said, I'm sure there are questions, and I have an email address listed here, and you can also question through my website, and you're welcome to do that. I have it available, and I don't mind answering any questions that I possibly can. I don't have the answers to everything, but in a lot of cases, there will be things that I can help you or point you toward the right direction. With that being said, thank you for listening to me, and we'll end this particular session.